HTML basics. That's what all about. And you just saw this template thing I made earlier. We had like a really rudimentary, super basic version of HTML. And we'll get back to that shortly. But before we do, we need to talk about terminology. We get our terminology correct so we can speak about things. And what you see in front of you, here are most of the things you need to know, terminology wise, to talk about HTML. So the whole thing here, uh, you see, the whole thing you see, what is that called? This larger thing is the element. The element is not this small thing at the end or first thing at the start. Some people do think that the element and tag are the same thing. It's not. The element is the whole thing. It is the first opening tag. It's the content inside. It's the ending tag. It's all of that. And now, just talking about this, talking about tags, what is a tag then? Yeah, you see, the first thing that goes between these two signs at the beginning, the larger n and smaller n sign, this part is called the opening tag. That's what opens up the element. And what closes the element is the closing tag. We discussed this earlier. It usually has this forward slash just before. It usually has, it always have this forward slash. And having this forward slash afterwards is really telling us all we need to know. It's an ending tag. Usually we don't have anything extra in it. We just have this forward slash and element and the element name. But in the opening tag, we have a lot of things going for us. We're telling something extra about the content. We're giving extra value to the content, and we can do a lot of things in here. And these things we put inside this first opening tags are called attributes. And attributes, they have values. So, for example, if we have this A, what does A stand for? Yeah, A is not something redundant. It's extremely important. It's about where HTML is built on. It's actually, I would say it's the core foundational element when we talk about the functionality of the web. It is the hyperlink. It's the link between pages. It's the link between documents. It's the idea that Tim Berners-Lee put out there at the very, very start to say, how do we get something that can link between documents so it's easy to find information? Well, it's the A. It's the A element. And to get that A element working, we can just type A. We don't know where to go. We need to have an attribute called href. And what does that stand for? Hyperreference. It's going to reference a page in the web. So it's a hyper reference. So that's the attribute. It's a standard attribute that we really need to use, especially in A. We don't use href in every element, in very few. Actually, we're using it almost exclusively in A. And then we have href, and it says value. That href has to have a value. And this is kind of unique value because you really put forth here is using an URL. So if you're going to another page, you're going to put an URL here. Sometimes you might want to put something else here, like an ID. If you're, for example, in a page and you want to click on a link and then it scrolls you down to the bottom of the page, you're still on the same page, but you want to go somewhere else. You want to go to a specific ID, a part of the page. That's also put in a hyperreference. So you have this attributes, a hyperreference. It enables us to put a specific value to say where we want to go. And then you see, it's always a space between here. A and A, it needs to be a space here. And then the same thing goes for here. It needs to be a space before you present the next attribute. In this case, it's called class. Class, it's a different kind of attribute. It really is an attribute used for naming stuff. And you could use IDs for that. You could use classes for that. And in this course, and in almost every case, we are going to use classes. IDEs don't use it like that, except for when you're working with JavaScript or a programming language. When you're working with CSS, you use classes. And then you have value again. So value could be something that's a class. Could be a couple of values actually in here. In class, you could have multiple values. So it doesn't really always have to be one value. It could be multiple values within one attribute. Depends on what kind of attribute you use. And then we come to the part that the user sees. The user sees besöktavlorna. You see this, and when they click it, they go to this link. And the code, the styling, the way this thing looks, we decide that in class by using a specific value. This whole setup is basic HTML.